So welcome to the International Franchise Association's Women Franchise Committee podcast, Her Success, the Story of Female Franchise Leaders. I am Leanne Caruso, and today I'm talking to Marianne O'Connell from FranWise, and we're so excited to have you on, a previous Crystal Compass winner. Thank you for joining us today, Marianne.
Oh, thanks. It's my pleasure, Leanne.
Good. This is so exciting that we're able to talk to you in quarantine in California. So tell me a little bit about yourself, your company, your title, and a little bit about your story and journey in franchising.
Well, sure. Instead of going to the title and stuff first, we'll just kind of blend it into a story.
Sounds great.
In my opinion, my career path makes sense. But if I tell you that I started with a degree in theater from a small school in New York, ended up in franchising, it doesn't make sense. But I am a born and bred New Yorker, and it's funny, I still think of myself as a New Yorker, but I've lived here twice as long as I lived there. And after graduating from college, in a lot of snow for 4 years, I decided to choose better weather, and I moved to California. Now, I really did want to be on Broadway. I never aspired to movies, but I loved the stage. In New York, did a few auditions, came out here, went to auditions and said, oh my gosh, there are millions of young women out there and they're willing to starve and do anything for their art. And I realized I wasn't. I wanted to make a living first. So I went, I guess it's kind of a stereotype, I became a waitress. And I think that's some great acting. Actually, I should say before that, before I left New York, I was working for Jack LaLanne as a fitness instructor. And I said, wow, this is acting. I'm getting paid to act like I like to work out. And it was sales, which was new. And there was a psychology component, which fascinated me. Came out here, became a waitress. And franchising, I got to through love. I fell in love with a man, went to work for his real estate company as a chauffeur. Then got a real estate license, decided I hated selling residential real estate. So I moved into commercial real estate and leasing. And in 1979, which sounds so long ago, the market dipped here. It didn't crash, but the commercial market took a big dip. And so here are two of us, both with tenuous careers at best. And the man I was dating, Thomas, was friends with a guy named Chris Friedrich. Chris had been buying ads for a racquetball court in Ohio from a little company called Valpak. And he said, we can do this. I'm sitting on the wrong side of the desk. So over a dinner at the Magic Castle, they came up with a plan, they divided the world, and all of a sudden I was in franchising. So first franchise for a brand new company. And it was a blast. It was the wild, wild west. We were making it up as we went along. You were selling 8 or 10 sales a day, which was so much fun, and learned about business. And I probably shouldn't admit that I didn't understand the unit economics of this franchise I was in. And I kept saying, how can we sell things for 2.5 cents when postage is more than that? And then there's the envelope, and duh. Luckily I learned. So that franchise was my introduction to business. My parents, first generation kids of immigrants, they didn't have a business background. They didn't have a big education background. So there was no prep for this. And I learned a lot. My guy I was dating becomes my husband, and he was a great salesman. He taught me a tremendous amount about sales and a tremendous amount about not how to run a business, because he was a terrible businessman. But for 11 years, we had 2 franchises, and then we got a divorce. I'm going to do my next life, I'll write a course on how to work with your spouse. So I called Money Mailer and said, you have good news and bad news. The bad news is 2 friends are getting divorced. The good news is there's some talent on the table if you want to hire. And so I got hired and spent the next 6 years as their vice president for franchise operations. And that's where I wrote my first set of manuals. That's where I developed my training. that was really trying to understand what support was all about. And 17 years with the company. I loved the brand. The founder was brilliant, but going in a direction that I didn't think had any fairness for the franchisees. And I realized if you come in the morning and you take the check, you do what they tell you. And when you get to the point you can't do that, you have to leave. So I resigned and thought I'd go out on my own. And I had no skill set to do that. And it didn't take long to figure that out. So I consulted for a couple of local brands and then decided I needed to learn something. So I took the IFA directory, the old book out, and went through and looked for, I wanted service brands. I wanted brands that had some weight and were growing and had a good reputation, and sent a cold resume over the door to Great Clips. And it happened to hit on the day that the guy they had hired to run the Southwest region quit. Oh. So I think my best education was working for Great Clips. They're an amazing company. But after 2.5 years, they are so structured and so process oriented, I was bored. There was nothing I could invent to help fix things. So I called Rhoda Olson and said, if I resign now, we'll still be friends. And we have remained that. And then I did finally go out, and that was 20 years ago. I went out and launched my company. So I am president and founder. I know these days, even when you file for the state, they don't accept president anymore. You're supposed to be CEO. But there are 3 of us, and that sounds like a pretentious title for 3 people. So I'm the president and founder.
That's awesome. And what a cool story. So you and I have similar backgrounds. I started as a music major, and then
really?
Yeah, and then realized I didn't want to do that for my life, and worked so hard in music, and then it became something that I didn't want to do anymore, and I became a bartender. So
we all go down those similar paths, don't
right.
we?
And I knew nothing about business, and here we are in franchising. But
so we can learn.
Yeah, it's great. So tell me about, so that's an interesting journey. So you had your path in different franchise brands and work with different consultants, and now here you own your own company. So I would venture to say that that's probably your greatest accomplishment. But what do you think in your story and in your journey are your greatest accomplishments as you sit here today?
That's an interesting one, because yes, I would say the greatest accomplishment was surviving the crash in 2008. You know, you hear the expression, I was down to my hanging on by my fingernails. I was down to cuticles. But I did not do it on my own. I did it with the help and support of some great franchise people. But weathering that, figuring out how to do it, to me, that was a great accomplishment. The other 2 that stand out for me was first being entrusted with the chairmanship of the WFC for a year, and then receiving the Crystal Compass. I was like, you've got to be kidding. There are so many other people out here who deserve it. So that really meant the world to me. It still does. In fact, it's sitting right over there.
It's amazing. It's a beautiful accomplishment. So,
yeah.
So in your journey, you've had some amazing accomplishments. What challenges got you over those humps? And I mean, obviously the crash of 2008, but what other kinds of challenges in business, or as a woman leader, or as a woman-owned company, what kind of additional challenges might you have faced that you could give insight or inspiring advice to others?
You know, I'm on a cusp. In the 70s, what did we call it? Consciousness raising. I think now you would probably refer to it as woke. And my sister was the first person I knew. She actually took a class on this. And I'm from a family that has very few men in it. I swear we're Amazons. We actually obviously throw in one every now and then so we can keep going. But I just saw the world as women do what they have to do or they want to do. And I have been surprised in business when I would run up against a guy who just didn't see that still had that old-fashioned attitude, and it did get in my way in one company. And I was surprised because the person who was probably the biggest misogynist was actually a little younger than I was. So generationally, I would have expected more, but it was actually decided, oh, men get this. You're an officer too, but you don't get anything. So stand over there. And at first I used to take it. I have to tell you that if I give anybody any advice, it's get a good therapist. And I do not joke with that. I mean it. It makes a huge difference. You may want to call it a life coach or whoever is good and can understand you, because I used to think that, well, those guys were in a certain role and therefore their judgment was probably correct. And I would take it way too much to heart. I'm glad to see that there's less of it. It's not gone. There's less of it. And I think that today's generation of women need to realize how much we've gotten in a very short amount of time. I said this on the day I left the WFC. My mom couldn't have a credit card in her own name. It just wasn't allowed. And it was hard to own property. You would try, there's a famous episode in Sex and the City where the one who plays the attorney is saying, no, I just want to own the house. And she had to keep signing it as an unmarried woman. Well, that's got to stop. Now, if people tend to think there is an issue with gender, I just ignore it and keep moving. And if they can't deal with it, then it just wasn't meant to be that we would work together. This is a true story, and it goes back some, but this is how things have changed. In 1979, early 1980, I'm still working with the property management company, and we were buying distressed commercial buildings, rehabbing them, and then selling them. And I was in charge of a project in Houston, Texas, 3 huge buildings. I needed a roofer. I needed contractors generally, and I couldn't get them. I was in my 20s and a woman in the 70s, and I'm in Texas, sorry, Texas, but they just weren't going to accept that I had any authority. And I brought my president in, who was a woman. It wasn't working. So I hired an actor, and this guy would show up at dinners. So Suzanne would fly in, Suzanne and I would have the dinners, and all he would do was sit there and go, well, I don't know, she's in charge of this project. She'll ask the questions. And then he would say at the end of the dinner, okay, so can we count on you for your business, or we'll get back to you. He was only an actor, but that was the only way we got competent help to come into the project.
Wow.
Things have changed.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is fascinating.
It was fun. We would laugh our heads off going, seriously? They bought that? But that's what it took. So that has changed over the years, but nothing is owed to us simply because of gender. You have to be in there to play the game, play for real. Don't give up on who you are as a woman. Don't give up on what your vision of femininity is, but you have to do the work and earn the work. But gender, just like race and creed and any of those, just shouldn't play a part. And this younger generation seems to be much more attuned to that.
Yes.
And I love it.
Yeah, they do. It seems like people are people. You just have to work hard to get where you are. It doesn't matter if you're purple, man, female, it doesn't matter. Just a person does a good job and gets rewarded. So hopefully that continues.
I hope so.
What an interesting story. Wow. So I feel like that was such an influential part of your journey. Part of this predetermined question I was going to ask you, but do you have another influential part of your journey that you wanted to share? Or, I mean, my goodness, that one.
I think, because one of my philosophies is that everybody who comes in your path is there to teach you something. Even if it's the guy who ticked me off in the grocery store yesterday, that was probably to teach me patience. I didn't do so well with that lesson, but different story.
Right.
But in terms of influence on me, Godfred Otute, he was the COO at Money Mailer just before I left. And he would do these things. He would stay late at night. And if you were there, it was like getting an MBA. You would just walk into his office, any question you had. We would wander all over the planet with the answers on how those things took us. So he taught me how to think about myself in the business and how it was the franchisees first. He was the person who taught me that, and that helped a lot. And he also said on the day that I resigned, he said, what you're going to need is one really good base client to get your business started. And I always kept that in the back of my head, and he was right. So he was very influential with that. And I think the other was to go to work at Great Clips and find out that a business that they knew all their numbers inside and out. I would tease them. You knew exactly how many hairs fell per square inch on the floor, but they understood what the cause and effect was. But that was a company that was run with an incredible amount of heart and integrity. And that's where I found the balance that I was looking for and that I wanted to take out and try and instill in other companies.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So right now, as we're recording this, it's May 2020. If anybody's listening to this in the future.
Or that can still remember the date.
Right, and we are in full-on quarantine. Some states are starting to open back up, but we've been loss of business. Franchising has taken quite a hit. Our businesses have all taken a hit. Our community, I think, has grown stronger. So what have you kind of learned over this journey in the last 8 weeks or so of quarantine and business and franchising? And I know you weren't expecting this question, but just curious, as you said in California, and I'm in Florida, so we're experiencing two different.
And yeah, we couldn't be more different on how our states are approaching this. First thing I found out personally, I am built for lockdown. I am totally okay with this. There are some people I miss, but I've always worked. I set this business up to be remote. Yeah. My readers live in different states. My clients, I went years where I didn't meet them. And then only in the last 4 years was I really doing a lot of travel. So it was really just resetting that clock, and we haven't missed a beat. Our approach in the beginning was to just say, life is tough, and getting a manual written is not what you should be focused on right now. So we're just taking a back seat, and when you're ready, we're here. And was surprised that 5 new concepts came through. So in this crazy time of COVID-19, people still have courage and vision, and they're moving forward with businesses. So for me, it's just been, you have to go back. And I think that the trait that helps everybody be great in business is being a listener. Yes. And instead of being in front of everyone, it's listening. Calls like this, companies or platforms like Zoom or GoToMeeting or Teams or whatever you're using, and haven't we all used all of them in the last couple of weeks, make it a lot easier. And this is becoming more expected. Mm-hmm. I find it very rare when someone says, no, just a phone call, which again is fine with me because I don't have to do my hair and makeup every morning. But people, it's been fascinating to watch how other people have responded to this. And I'm not talking about the political stuff that's going on, the business owners, which franchises were able to harness what they already had. And I'm trying to not use the word pivot because it's been so overused. But to make an adjustment and to look at different revenue streams or different delivery methods. Tam Kennedy from Taco John's made a comment on a webinar. Well, she went from like a 3-minute throughput time, and she just has to accept that it's 11 or something like that. Changing your expectations. So it will be interesting to see if our expectations are different for what life after reopening is.
Right.
And how people are going to adjust to it. But I've been really proud of the franchise community. And I wrote recently, if there was ever a time for a franchisee to understand the value of the fees he or she pays, it's now. The franchises are holding up so much better than the independent businesses are because they had the strength of marketing funds behind them. They had extra people who could be making technological changes and redesigning the business. So I'm real proud of the franchise community.
Yeah, me too. I think it's I think it's on the other side. Franchising is really hopefully wins in the end, but to watch how it's evolved and how businesses have had to kind of deconstruct to reconstruct and you know, be flexible and be vulnerable, and the leadership has just been amazing through these franchise systems to watch. So I agree. I think it's been really kind of cool to watch, and I hope that people really do see the value of a franchise system because of the support and the dollars and the systems and processes in place so that they can pivot to, to something new.
We're another call. I'd make you take a drink right now, but okay.
Okay, so just one last question, unless you have something else to share. This has been really great, insightful information, and thank you for sharing your journey. But if you could have one video call with a famous or influential person, who would that be?
So maybe your music major part will understand my answer. It would be Stephen Sondheim, Broadway composer and lyricist. And here's why. I'm not a big, well, besides the theater connection, but I'm not a big reader of business books. I mean, I do. I wait until I find the one that is floating to the top of everybody's list and I grab that, because I find most of the ideas are fairly set. It's just how you're combining them. I mean, Traction did a great job of taking some very common sense ideas, but putting them together in a way that was actionable. So that was great. But I would prefer to be a student of human nature. I read more fiction and some history telling me what people actually did, and fiction telling me the possibilities for what people can do. And Sondheim, in his fictional writing, he is such a student of us. And when you listen to things, there are so many life lessons. And I find myself peppering my consultations with clients with words like, I don't know if you know Stephen Sondheim, but as he says in this one song, there are just so many life lessons that carry through on business and life, because business is just about human beings. So that's who it would be, and I better do it fast. The man just turned 90. So I better get on that. But can I just say, I want to do a shout out to some of the people who helped build my business, and they may not know who did.
Yes.
So the first one was Zig Ziglar, and not because I was a fan of Zig Ziglar's, but he was the spokesperson for Money Mailer for a few years. And the year was supposed to be the big introduction. I was on stage the act before his, and we had been doing all this work to keep it a secret, and somebody screwed up, and what was supposed to be my slide was a picture of him. And I just looked at it and said, so I've been trying out a new haircut. Can I show of hands, do I look old and do I look male? And then kept going. Well, he said, he gave me a scholarship to his public speaking and presentation courses in Texas. That made a huge difference for me, because even though all the theater training, it's different when you're talking for business. So big shout out to him. And then in terms of Money Mailer, Kelly Cromvoots, who's now over at Home Franchise Concepts, started as my assistant. And I would not have gone anywhere without her. She is the best people whisperer on the planet, as she calls it. It's her superpower. And then when it came to getting through the recession, two key people, Jeff Sieber over at Fran Fund, because Jeff kept calling people and telling them they needed manuals done when they didn't, and sending them to me, and hired me to write their manuals. And I'm like, Jeff, seriously? And he said, no, that's what we're going to do. He seriously kept me on board. And Tim Johnson, who at the time was with Process Peak, gave me one simple piece of advice that I'm not going to share because it's a big difference in how we work. But it was one simple thing, and all of a sudden, everything started to change. And then all the, you know, there are just so many wonderful people. You mentioned two of them already, but Susan Beth goes in that list, Marianne Murphy, Michelle Rowan, but Paul Pickett. Paul Pickett is my moral touchstone. He is, watching him in business, watching him in his personal life. And I think if more franchisors could act the way they do over at Welbers Unlimited, yes, we would all be in such better shape. And there would be, sorry, litigators, you just wouldn't have anything to do.
I think beautifully said. Yes. Those are all wonderful people. And I love that you know every single touch point along the way that those people influenced your life and your business and who you are today and what you've become and how now you go to inspire other women in franchising, people in franchising. So thank you again for sharing your story. I loved hearing it. I had no idea. And it's so inspiring. Just the fact that you had that you had to have a male actor come to your business meeting just to get stuff done. It's shocking, but I'm glad we're not there anymore. But obviously you overcame. So thank you.
And as long as your generation and the rest coming down the line, don't forget where we were, don't forget what we got, and keep the tension on the line. And that way it keeps, just like fishing, I can keep the tension on the line, I can get the fish in the boat.
Right. Perfect. Thank you so much, Marianne. I appreciate
My
you.
pleasure. You have a great day, Leanne.
Thank you, you too.